All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for your attention over the next half hour or so as Carl and I present to you the recommendations from the Urban Nutrient Management Panel. So why urban nutrient management? Along with the continued growth in the Bay watershed comes urban lawns and the conversion of our landscape from ag lands and forests to turf grass. And the current estimate from the Bay program is that there's a little under 4 million acres of pervious area in the Bay, and that translates to a little under 10% of the total Bay Area watershed. So quite an expansive land cover within the Bay. And the majority of that pervious land cover is associated with private land, that being residential lawns. About a third to, or 10% to about a third of the lawn area from these data selected from Maryland and Virginia is public. So those are your public right-of-ways and your public parks and areas. So given the expanse of this area, along with a number of surveys that show that the majority of homeowners fertilize their lawn, the Bay program convened this expert panel to review their current credits for urban nutrient management, which before this panel were 17% for nitrogen and 22% for phosphorus. This is a summary of our recommendations, and Carl will go through with them at a slower pace, but I just wanted to highlight the different categories of credit. The first category of credit deals with phosphorus fertilizer legislation at the state level, and an automatic credit is given to those states with it at 25%. But we recognize in reviewing non-farm sales fertilizer data, and also just by going to your local garden store, that there is a general decline in phosphorus content in fertilizer itself. So there is also an automatic credit for states without P fertilizer legislation.
Known as the freeloaders.
Thank you, Tom. All right. And then there's a similar type of statewide credit for nitrogen, states that have nitrogen fertilizer legislation and those that don't. And then the third category of credit is specific to individual properties that have urban nutrient management plans. And we divided that type of credit is partitioned between yards or lawns that are low risk export for fertilizer and high risk. So our review began taking stock of, well, what Bay states had fertilizer, phosphorus fertilizer legislation. At the time of our panel, Maryland, New York, and Virginia had passed phosphorus legislation. I believe Pennsylvania is under development or consideration. But the phosphorus legislation is not an outright ban on fertilizer, phosphorus in fertilizer. Phosphorus can still be applied to lawns as part of these legislation for either maintaining turf grass or for startups lawns. And a lot of this is based on your soil test that might indicate a need for applying phosphorus to your turf grass. We then jumped into a review of the science. Tom and Cecilia may have counted about 150 papers that we had reviewed, and it ran the gamut of the chemical and the ecological science, looking at nitrogen and phosphorus dynamics on lawns and the fate of it once it is applied. But also looking at homeowner behaviors in terms of the management practices and that implication on fertilizer or nitrogen and phosphorus export from lawns. And this literature review helped to inform us what are those high-risk factors that affect nitrogen loss and phosphorus loss from lawns, but it also helped us to define what behaviors can help reduce that loss. So this is an excerpt of the expert panel research. Stu Schwartz, sitting in the front row there, looked at 16 papers and to summarize, well, what is the nitrate loss from leachate based on application rate and frequency of application? And there was somewhat of, through that review, there was a threshold that seemed to come through based on, I think it was a 3 pound per acre application. And the green bars, or the green cells, show that with the, in general, lower application rates or a less frequency of application resulted in a lower leachate loss of nitrate, with the yellow and red colored cells indicating higher nitrate leachate losses with greater application rates, which was above this 3 pound per acre application rate of nitrogen. And so this is what was pulled out of that particular research, but as you can see, or not see, and I'll tell you, is that the studies also drew on and highlighted a number of other factors in terms of the soil type, in terms of the watering domain. And so pulling together all that research, we've identified a number of high-risk or low-risk factors in this very colorful slide. And along the top bar or top of the box are your physical landscape characteristics characterizing the slope or the soil quality of that lawn, where you would have a higher risk of nutrient export with steeply sloping yards or shallow sandy soils as well, and a lower risk for more permeable soils or lower slopes. And on the vertical sides of this box, the blue and the orange, are management type practices. So if you are excessively applying fertilizer or providing nutrients above and beyond which you need to grow healthy, dense turf grass, you're likely going to be exporting nutrients from your yard. Conversely, how you are managing your clippings, are you dumping them along the curb? Are you sweeping up the fertilizer that reaches your impervious sidewalks or driveway? And those characteristics. So this very colorful graph really helps to summarize some of our key findings. But in text format, here are a list of 12 of our high-risk factors that came out of our literature review. And some of those I had just mentioned, relating to slopes greater than 15%, exposed soil, about 5% or more on the surface of your property. If you're over-fertilizing, if there's P saturation in the soils, the soil quality itself, whether it's compacted or shallow, and things like that. So the high-risk factors can be managed to some degree. And over 40 of the studies and reports that we had looked at helped us to identify what are those management practices that can help reduce the risk of nutrient export from the use of fertilizer. And these helped us to define what these 10 core urban nutrient management practices would be. The goal of having turf on your property is really to ensure that you maintain a dense cover of grass so that you're reducing bare spots and preventing erosion when that rainfall eventually hits it. You can choose to fertilize at the recommended rate. Many extension services or states provide recommended rates for fertilization based on your grass species in that area, or you may choose not to fertilize as well. But in the case of choosing not to fertilize, you have to go back to that first urban nutrient management practice, which is if you're choosing not to fertilize, and make sure you're still maintaining that dense turf cover. So if you choose to fertilize, that you should be fertilizing when your grass is actively growing. Take it up, apply the food when the grass is hungry, right? You want to maximize the use of slow nitrogen, immediately sweep off any fertilizer that hits the impervious surfaces, and never to apply fertilizer 15 to 20 feet near a water feature. So if you choose to fertilize or not to or don't choose to fertilize, you're probably still going to have to cut your grass. And what are you going to do with that grass? Well, we're encouraging the use of mulching or retaining the clippings on the lawn. That also helps reduce the use of fertilizer through the recycling of nutrients from those clippings. Maintaining a 3-inch mower height, as well as treating your lawn as a disconnection practice itself. Use it as a stormwater treatment, so keep it in a healthy condition. And lastly, consulting an expert to see what other bay-friendly practices that you could use.